So you're located in Minnesota, right?
Yeah. I'm in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area here in Minnesota. And so I'm in kind of the northeast metro area in a swamp forest known as
Interesting. Does that mean anything?
Yeah, it so I'm near a lake that's known as White Bear Lake, which is kind of a mistranslation of the original Dakota. It means something closer to Gray Bear Lake, and so Matamidai is Mato and Mide are the words for gray bear and lake. And so as far as I understand, it could be getting that slightly wrong. I'm not an expert in the Dakota language, but that's my understanding.
No, that's really cool. I love knowing like the background behind names and locations and whatnot. And I also know that bears are a huge symbolism item for you. Like I was reading your blog and I know in your book and things like that, bears seem to be kind of your motif. Is that correct?
Yeah, so Bjorn is the Norwegian and Swedish word for bear. And so Bjorn is not only my name, but it's become sort of a way of understanding myself. And I'm big on metaphors and understanding myself and the world through metaphors. And so, yeah, bears have become an important part of that. They show up in my poetry, they show up in my writing, and even in my tattoos and everywhere. So bears are important to me for sure.
It's really cool. I honestly forgot that Bjorn and Bear are the same. I knew that and then completely forgot. So thank you for
Yeah.
reminding me. That's so cool. I was reading one of the articles on your blog, where um, you were kind of talking about how you were seeing yourself like through as if you were a bear and you became human. I
Mhm.
think is kind of what the
Yeah.
blog was saying. And there was a poem with it, and I just love that. It was such a really interesting way to look at, I feel like, ourselves as humans because we're all doing this for the first time.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what spoke to me in it. But do you want to go in a little more depth kind of about that?
Yeah, sure. So it was one of those things that kind of fell out of my mouth a number of years ago. I was gathered with some community workers in South Africa in 2014. We had gathered together for a week, and I had always kind of struggled I knew it was going to be a week of quite a lot of vulnerability and quite a lot of intimacy. And inevitably, part of my story has to do with depression and um, mental illness. And so I struggled over the years to kind of figure out how do you talk about that. Um, and of course, Bjorn meaning bear. I was kind of introducing myself, and I heard myself start to say like, so my name is Bjorn, and one of the things you should know about me is that I live with bears, and those bears have names like depression and anxiety, and you might be intimidated or fearful for me when you come into contact with them. You might think, "Oh gosh, Bjorn, there's a bear right behind you, like run or get rid of it or even kill it." But living in good relationship with those bears has become a really important part of my well-being, and not only that but my thriving. And once I sort of had said that, it became a metaphor that I chose to kind of explore more and more. And I think the poem that you're referring to might have been the one about my previous 57 lives. And the idea was that like I had lived 57 previous existences all as bears. And this is the first one that I showed up as a human. And so no wonder I'm a little bit out of sorts, not super practiced at it and prone to mistakes and even hurting people because up until now, I've taken the form of a bear. And I found a little bit of compassion and grace for myself in that story to sort of recognize and remember that so far as I know, this is the first and only time I've been a human. It's no great shock that I wouldn't be that great at it or wouldn't do it perfectly as whatever that could mean. And so I found a lot of grace and compassion in that and found also, the more I sat with it, found more ideas around things like, I love to watch bears move, and even as I've understood my own body as a kind of a bigger guy, and bears aren't self conscious about their stomachs or the fat that is on their arms or whatever. They just kind of move within themselves, and it's majestic, and nobody goes, "Oh gosh, look at that, bear, it's too big." Although there is Fat Bear Week, I guess.
Although, and I feel like they applaud it almost too in nature. They're kind of like, wow, that's a big bear. Like that's awesome.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. So I found like, gosh, this thing, this relationship with my body, uh, that has at times been a source of a lack of confidence or a lack of solidity, it can actually be restored for myself as one that I sort of, what, like when a bear runs, they call it majestic, even as its body is undulating and swinging and whatever. And so what if I allowed myself to move in a similar way? And what if I tried to see myself with the same sort of compassionate gaze as we watch a bear moving in the mountains. And so, yeah, you'll find that I've played with that metaphor quite a lot. That even my book of poems, A Beautiful Amble, is a reference to this idea that I need to move the way a bear dances in this beautiful amble, not particularly hurried, not because survival isn't difficult or needed, but because a bear is so utterly itself that whatever it encounters, it has to do so grounded in its own body and its own bareness. And what wisdom can I derive from that perhaps can help me be grounded in my own wisdom and my own sense of self? And how can I offer that exercise to the people and communities that I work with, where they can find metaphors both individually and collectively, that perhaps offer a little bit of liberation and groundedness and hopefully a little bit of solace
Mm.
when life can be so terribly difficult.
That's so beautiful, especially because we sometimes can see our own bodies reflect in nature the curves, the dents, the kind of beauty of imperfection in nature. And I really like that you kind of make that comparison, make that as a sort of symbol for your identity. Something that also really resonated with me was how you talk about depression, anxiety. It's something that I struggle with. It's something that I've seen a lot of people around me struggle with. It's something that I think a lot of people right now are struggling with more than they did before. And another line that kind of I remember from your book that you were mentioning was sadness is also for running. And that kind of hits because I think so often we kind of look at sadness as something that's stagnant, something that doesn't it kind of keeps us still. But you actually reframe it as movement. So I just want to know, where does that idea come for you? Like, was there like a moment where you kind of realized that the sadness could be motion rather than paralysis?
Yeah, I think, a number of years back, as I say, I first experienced depression and suicidal ideation and things like that as a tween. So many people, when your body is going through those changes, it's a tough time in life anyway. And then you add hormones and everything else. I think for a lot of years, many of the people around me repeated that the sentiment that sadness was a weakness or was a thing to overcome or move beyond. That sadness was always seen as the opposition to my joy, my compassion, my strength. And I think it was probably somewhere along the line in my study, especially in Tibetan Buddhism, that I began to understand that this sadness is like a great big pool of water within me, and that water isn't necessarily negative. And in fact, my deep sense of sadness and my brokenheartedness was actually a source of my strength. It was a source of insight. It was a source of compassion for others. It moved me toward justice. It moved me toward inclusion. It moved me toward the beautiful things of the world, and began to understand that perhaps the sadness wasn't the great barrier standing between me and who I might be in this life, but that actually it was a tremendous reservoir of strength, of power, of insight, and that if I could learn to live with that sadness, I might open up new possibilities for myself. And so the poem that you're talking about, really, it's really about this idea of looking at a foal, a baby horse, and how, when a foal is born, it can run within minutes of life or hours. And that's tremendous to me. But at first, it's so wobbly and awkward, and it doesn't quite know what to do. It's popped into this world, and you would think you could look at a baby foal if you had encountered it for the absolute first time and think, gosh, you should probably not try to walk. You should just lie there in the grass because those legs are not trustworthy and they don't seem to serve you. But there's this tremendous wisdom that is found in understanding how quickly the thing that seems so untrustworthy or so weak or so mismatched to the need becomes a tremendous source of strength. And so I think, I was trying to capture in that poem through that image a little bit of that reframing to sort of say that just like you would look perhaps at that animal and realize that those legs that seem to be so suited for curling up underneath you are actually quite matched to the task of running, and that maybe sadness is a similar truth for many of us.
That's so profound. I like how you especially mentioned Buddhism as like a sort of inspiration for you as well. I've grown up a Buddhist myself, and kind of learning that sadness is part of life, and the more you have that acceptance, you can move on from it and find happiness within that. And I like how you kind of frame that in your example. Did poetry find you, or did you find poetry?
Yeah, I suppose it's a bit of both, isn't it? I think as I reflect on sort of my journey with writing, I've always loved to write. I've always felt called or drawn to writing. And at different times, it's looked very different. I know when in my academic work, first as a master's student, then a doctoral student, a lot of the work was I was encouraged often to remove the fluff, or to remove the metaphor, to remove all the things I couldn't prove, all the things I needed to qualify and couch within certain understandings and parameters. And there's a lot of wisdom in that. There's a tremendous wisdom in that. And yet, as I think about my own upbringings in the Lutheran tradition of Christianity, for instance, so much of our traditions and our ceremonies and rituals were around spoken language that was written and spoken together. Liturgy often would be call and response. And the hymns and the psalms and things that I read are all, from a literature standpoint, could be understood as poetry. And so the prophetic words of everybody from Isaiah and Jeremiah in that tradition, all the way to the words that I heard and read from people like Dr. Martin Luther King or others, I heard a poetry in them. They were speaking truths that seemed to move even the most mechanical or linear thinker. And so for me, I found too that although academia prepared me to speak a very certain language that was useful and specific to a time and culture, it also created a distance between my own thoughts and the sort of accessibility of those thoughts to a lot of people. So finding poetry has been a way of reclaiming a language that holds paradox, that holds mystery, that holds the space for the unknown, which is tremendously important for our lives together, which are filled to the brim with the unknown and the unknowable, and that require us to be able to draw upon rich imagery and ideas and to hold more than one truth at a time, and to lean into the ambivalence of multiple emotions or sensing and feeling that we all have from time to time. So poetry has been there all along, but I would say my full embrace of it has come more and more in the last probably 10 or so years, and I'm really grateful for that.
Do you find that, I really like the way you were talking about how almost like you were slightly coaxed into writing in a certain way, obviously for academic purposes, but then it sounds like your soul was needing this other way of writing as well, right? Have you been able to bridge those in any way, or have they been keeping kind of separate in your life, or is that part of your mission per se, is kind of finding a good bridge between the two?
That's a great question. I think to a certain extent they have been kept separate, although Um, if you look at my academic work, it's a lot about metaphor. In fact, my dissertation was called "The Metaphors We Live By," or that we help by, which was borrowed from another text called "The Metaphors We Live By," and the idea was that this meaning-making endeavor that we all are constantly engaged in requires all this imagery and things. And so when I did my research in Uttarakhand, which is a north central state in India and the Himalayas, the Himalayan foothills. And part of what I did was go and listen to the stories of NGO workers talking about what they were doing, just telling stories. What is it you're doing? Because my suspicion was that for those of us who do community work, peace work, development work of various kinds, we're not always guided by the theory, the strict theory that we use in academics. We tend to be operating off of more meaning-making endeavors, stories of identity, stories where we describe one thing using the language of another, which is what a metaphor does. And so what I wanted to do was understand what are the metaphors that really guide us in our understanding of how we help. And can I learn something about the work of community development in this case by understanding the mix of metaphors, the mix of stories that community workers draw upon that help them make sense of both themselves and the communities that they're helping, and how do those identities mix? And so in that way, I brought metaphor and meaning making directly into that sort of academic space, which was a little bit unusual in the school and research community that I was a part of. But I think it opened a door for me to engage in this meaning making process that I found to be so deeply important, and had been inspired by peace building experts like John Paul Lederach and Angela Lederach, who had written about the metaphors we use to understand peace building processes. And they had encouraged us to move away from linear metaphors, conceptual metaphors that sort of set up an expectation that peace processes go from A to B to C to D. And that by having those concepts and the metaphors that those were based in, we set up expectations for peace building, for instance, that were actually not grounded in the realities of what it looked like. They were grounded in linear expectations, which cause all kinds of problems for funding models, for expectations for governments and communities. And so we needed to really go back into reconsider the metaphors. So I was connecting peace building and meaning making into this world of community development to wonder how those things could connect. So that's kind of how those came together for me.
That's so fascinating, because I almost like think of poetry kind of as like a more quiet form of peace building. It doesn't directly negotiate treaties, it doesn't draft the policies, but it does have the power to make a shift happen inside somebody. And it kind of also makes you pause and maybe reconsider things. When you were working with those NGOs and peace workers, did you kind of find poetry to be that metaphor and like be able to kind of give those metaphors for your peace work? And do you think it's like a direct tool and that could be used for peace building? And what could that like even look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I see lots of space for poetry in those times, in part because, again, peace work often requires us to hold multiple truths that feel incompatible or contradictory. And at least for a time, while we build some kind of coherence that everyone can live with, there needs to be tremendous tension and room for multiple truths and perspectives to be held. And art of all kinds is best suited for that. So art, like poetry and other kinds, are really useful for creating containers that hold the tensions and fears and angers and emotions of conflict in a way that allow people to find new language and new space. And so poetry, for instance, can open up for us new language and new understanding of a situation. One of the things that I love to do is to take a community into a space, say like the woods, ask them to find images in the landscape that remind them of the conflict that they're in. And what we'd find is that we might walk through a space and, one of you might say, oh, I saw this log and it was rotting and falling apart. And it reminded me so much of what's going on here. And the other of you might say, I saw that same log. Are you talking about the one with yeah, that's the one. It's funny. I saw that and thought, gosh, there's tremendous capacity. Like, this is becoming the soil that will allow new growth. And now we have this image that we can work with a little bit that can help us bring out the language of our understanding and our experiences, and perhaps find new ways to talk about what we're stuck in, to understand, like, gosh, it is interesting, isn't it, that you and I can both look at this same thing and have such different visceral reactions to the same lived experience, at least on its surface. Because I could tell a story that says, we went out in the woods and we saw a log. And I've told a single story, but I haven't told all the experiences of that story. So art, poetry in particular, is really useful in helping open up space for paradox, for helping us understand the tensions that are inherent in conflict, and that perhaps give us images of space that allow something new to emerge. And so, yeah, I absolutely believe that poetry and art in particular have tremendously important roles and hold huge possibilities for the work of conflict transformation, peace building, and community building in general.
Yeah, and especially if you think like poets like Maya Angelou, who've done such amazing work with using poetry, language, expression as kind of a tool for transformation and for inspiration as well for peacemakers. And it also, like, I think you said something about how you go back and you like Martin Luther King, their quotes, they kind of transcend time and like our lived thinking. And I really like that perspective.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're fortunate to have a tremendous global canon of poets and thinkers who have left us clues as to the tremendous diversity that we have inherited, and that is here creating conditions conducive to life all around us. And I think that's part of what's so fun about and so important about diversity, is that when you travel the world and you read Rumi, or you read Basho, or you read so many others, so many that we've never heard of because they've been oppressed or lost in some other way as well. There's tremendous space for insight, and it's a real resource, a real gift to us to be able to find all those different voices throughout space and time.
It's very interesting that a lot of the same kind of things are all discussed throughout everything, like very similar topics, even in very different lights or in very different relation or different metaphors. It's all kind of comes down to some of the same human principles that we all kind of share, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the relationship between the universal and the particular has been fraught. And in colonial spaces, of course, a particular has been enforced often as a universal onto people. And so I take my experience and I create a sense of what the universal is, and then I take it to one of you and I say, here's what the truth is. But when the particulars are allowed to speak to a universal rather than a universal to dictate to particulars, then we find that there's incredible unity and rhyme and rhythm to what humans have been dealing with since time immemorial. People really have had to deal with similar things time and time again. And it's remarkable that we found so many different ways to do it, to live with the challenges of life. And so we need that diversity, just like we need biodiversity. We need the diversity of voices and insights, because no one tradition and no one experience can capture the full richness of the whole. But if we have a tremendous, broad collection of that diversity, we get a better sense of what the whole is and are better able to deal with the difficulties and the challenges of being human, not so that we can simplify or dictate to one another, but rather that we can open up possibilities for more and more ways of flourishing in a mutual way, which of course, as the wonderful teacher Robin Wall Kimmerer has repeated, all flourishing is mutual. And so that ability to have diversity and let it contribute to a whole is so much about what it is to be a human.
Yeah, I really like that. I want to ask a little bit of like a more personal question. You talked about how kind of, obviously, we've talked a lot about poetry and a lot about peace building, but you were mentioning art in all its forms. Is there other art that you like to dip your toes into or participate in?
Yeah, from a participation standpoint, I think music has long been a big part of my life. Singing and drumming have been things that have been a part of my life since I was a child. I learned percussion when I was starting in like fourth or fifth grade. I think I began to take drum lessons and marched in a drum line for a while. And then when all my friends were learning how to play the drum set, I saw like the congas and the bongos and the djembe, and I said, that looks pretty cool too. And y'all are trying to fight over the drum set. Maybe I'll go play one of these.
I love that.
And so I got to do that. And singing was a big part of my childhood too. It's how my wife and I met. We were in a band together, a volunteer band doing kind of community building work about 21 years ago. And so music has been a big part of our life, continues to be.
That's
And
so
then,
cool.
thank you. And then the other one that I love visual art. I love crafts. I love to see what people do. I do a bit of woodworking myself, but street art has always kind of spoken to me. Murals and more informal forms of street art. I think it's such an amazing way that people have found expression even in tremendously difficult spaces. If you go to any conflict zone in the world, um, nearly without exception, you'll find forms of street art, sometimes very subtle, sometimes very vibrant, and you'll see the intimacy of people's stories reflected in that street art. And I just love that. So my camera collection is full of examples of street art from places as different as, Nainital in India and Bogota in Colombia and Belfast in Northern Ireland. There's amazing, amazing work, and I've always really, really enjoyed that. And I suppose I'm a little bit subversive at heart, so there's something about art that's created in the face of power that gets me excited.
Yeah, it's a little bit art and a little bit like political puns.
Exactly.
I love
Exactly.
that. That's so beautiful. Is there like one that you can envision right now that's like in your brain?
Yeah, there's this image that I have. There was an incredible piece in Bogota that is a young indigenous woman in an urban setting on a big side of a wall, and the colors, the vibrancy, the if I remember right, there's some kind of headdress, and it just speaks in this beautiful, powerful way that makes you go, gosh, what does she know? And where she's from and what story is being told here. So I love that about art, the way it evokes curiosity and not only curiosity, but like a hunger. Like you want to know, you need to know what's this
Tell me
about?
everything about what this is and who this is, and I need to know it all.
Exactly.
That's
Wow,
so
that sounds
beautiful.
so beautiful.
Yeah. Gosh, I can't even like I find music as such good way to like also be an outlet for, especially when we're talking about anxiety, depression. Music is something you can listen to, but also express yourself in through playing the piano, drums, like you said. So I love that perspective. I wanted to ask you if you could leave people with one thought or kind of one truth about stories and about poetry, like about the kind of the way um that we move through the world, what would that be?
I think it would be that stories and storytelling, story hearing is such a powerful and deeply inherent part of being a member of our species that like is a balm for almost anything you're suffering, almost anything you're excited about, almost anything you're fearful of can be somehow improved or celebrated or bared alongside by storytelling and story hearing. I like personally the verb story hearing a lot because I think storytelling tends to be the piece like I've done here today where it's my turn, I guess, to get to do a bit of storytelling, but the ability to hear other people's stories, to me, is the real rewarding part. Because if I'm always talking, then I don't really get to enjoy that diversity, which I've been saying is so wonderful. You know, although storytelling is important as well, the story hearing is huge. And it's really, to me, the both of those, to be able to tell my story, but also then to hear deeply and often the stories of others. That dance between the two of telling and hearing is where story really has its power. And so as you're looking for your own voice, also, I think you find it often by hearing the voices of others. And so sometimes it can feel like, who's going to hear me? Will I ever get a chance? Who will listen to me? And what I've found is that when you're faithful to story hearing, opportunities to tell also make themselves known eventually.
That's so beautiful. Gosh, I can't even because like some of the stories you said, they just kind of like weave so beautifully into how you, as a storyteller, use metaphors as such a powerful tool to convey a story, but also bridge those divides and gaps. And especially, I like how you said, as much as we like to storytell, it's just as important to also listen. And that's such a beautiful, I think, takeaway from the conversation we've had so far. Courtney, is there something that you had in mind that you wanted to ask from Bjorn?
I just really loved the way you were describing like story hearing as like a verb, is I think the words you were using. And in me, it kind of invokes that like childhood nostalgia for when you like sit down and you're listening to a story, someone's reading you and you're so excited and it's like the best part of your night or things like that. It just kind of invoked that feeling, but then digging into like the rest of your life where so much of how you learn and comprehend and move forward in life is from hearing people tell all of these stories, whether it be like cautionary tales from your parents or like creation stories on how we understand like our own being, or even just drama and gossip you hear with your friends, right? It's all stories that you kind of hear and go along with. So I really like the way you frame that as a verb, because it kind of, it's an action, but it brought all of these like feelings into my mind of all of the story hearing that I've done throughout my life.
That's such a powerful thing that you said. I like that you gave us like a nice takeaway message as well. But I'm curious, are there any stories that you're still in the process of telling? Like, what's next for you?
Yeah, am a writer, at my core, and I see myself as an artist first and foremost. Later this year, my wife Elisa and I will be becoming the executive directors of an organization called Holden Village, which is a wilderness retreat center in central Washington state. Incredible place. And I can't wait to offer some leadership in that space. But sometimes I think people think, oh, well, so you're a nonprofit management person or a nonprofit executive. And of course, that is part of who I am, but at my heart, I'm a writer, a philosopher, I suppose, an artist. And so I have lots of works that want to come forward, and I'm trying to be faithful. Again, like sometimes that story hearing also needs to be to listen to your own story and to take a posture of curiosity. And what is it like to do, as Courtney said, and sort of sit at your own feet and listen to the story of your life a bit and wonder and ask what it's telling you and where it's taking you and what might be worth sharing from it, and being sort of faithful to that desire to know yourself better and to know the world better. And so, yeah, I have a project in mind right now that is a little amorphous, I would say. I'm trying to decide if it's strictly a book of poetry, if it's something altogether different, something I'm sure somebody else has done somewhere, but that I've not really come across. And so what would that look like for me? And so, yeah, I'm playing with that a little bit. And that's the fun of getting to be a story writer as well. So, all those three strands of storytelling, story hearing and story writing, that confluence of rivers is the place that I want to live.
I'm excited for you. I mean, we're all about stories here at Connie, so I hope you keep us in the loop on all of that, because we definitely want to like share your story. But yeah, Courtney, did you have anything you wanted to ask?
I had one quick question. It's a little selfish because it's my own kind of curiosity question, but it's a little bit just for everyone as well. It's kind of like if people, so you talked about how like, I like the way you framed that, where you were saying how sometimes like in your own art, recognizing you have to like listen to yourself as a story listener, and that sometimes story listening then influences everything else. But if someone is not a writer, or if someone is a writer but is not kind of in the practice of writing poetry or getting their emotions out, what would be like some like super small steps someone could take to starting to write or kind of finding that story within themselves?
Yeah. Well, there's fantastic material. I mean, one of the things that's so unique about this moment in human history is the tremendous amount of resources that we have access to through just even social media and the prompts that are out there and the guides and stuff. So I would definitely encourage people to do that. But I would also say that like a lot of the fear or hesitation that comes that stops us from trying an expression of art in some form, comes from a sort of a state, a conviction within ourselves that like, I'm not an artist, I'm not a writer, I'm not this. And I understand that. And I think there's also though an opportunity to play with the what if, or try to remember that thing that many of us had as children when we just put on a cape for a minute, or we put on a hat and we're just like, what if I'm this for the next 5 minutes? I think that can be a really safe way to venture into an artistic practice, is just to sort of say, without any pressure on an outcome, without any judgment on the quality of what is done. I think the real difference between the real freedom that comes in becoming an artist is the letting go of the judgment of the outcome or the output of the artistic practice, and instead to just sort of say, what would it feel like to me to write a sentence or two? What would it feel like for me to write a list of things that definitely seem to be true about me, and a list of things that definitely seem to be not true about me? And what does that feel like? And is the practice itself liberating, rather than asking, is the outcome art? I don't know about that. I'm an artist because of what I practice, not necessarily because of what I produce. And I think that distinction can be really liberating for people who are thinking about an artistic practice as a part of their well-being.
Those are really great tips. I really love that. I love in a less eloquent way, of just producing without the fear of what comes and of what maybe others think, just kind of getting it out and whatnot. Thank you so much for sharing all of that.
Yeah, and like thank you for sharing your work and your insights. I also wanted to ask if anyone wanted to find your work, find what you do, connect with you, wherever they do that.
Yeah. There's a couple of ways, I suppose. One is that you can go to Looking Bear, like looking around, like lookingbear.com or .org. No, .org. I forgot I changed it.
We'll put
It used to be something
text.
else. I have a website, so visit my website, which you can find in the footnotes, perhaps. And my book, A Beautiful Amble, I'm not always a big fan of big corporate giants, but I will say that for self-publishing or for independent publishing, Amazon is kind of a useful tool. And so the easiest place the one place to find my book is on Amazon.com, because they print it on demand, which allows me to not have to make a big purchase of copies ahead of time. And so you can find A Beautiful Amble is available there. And yeah, I think those are the main ways. LinkedIn, if you're on LinkedIn, of all the social media platforms that are out there, that's the one I have tended to use, because I really love getting to weave in different people in different places. And so LinkedIn has become the place where I'm able to do that and have kind of an interdisciplinary space. And so that's probably the place to follow me. But yeah, more to come, I'm sure, but those are the main things right now.
Really, thank you for sharing. And also, congratulations to you and your partner on your new roles. That sounds really exciting. And your book is beautiful. Somia sent us a couple poems, but I'm going to make sure she brings me the book so I can read it as well.
Yeah.
Because she's read it and she just spoke wonders of it. And she also sends her love and says hello.